Yeah, what's interesting is that acari are from the taxon arachnid, and spiders have webs that they live in. The thing with these acari that Andrew Cross found is that they're associated with the fungus, almost like they're in some kind of symbiotic relationship with the fungus, almost as if the fungus was um, the web of these acari, like what the web is to the spider. There's some kind of they're connected somehow in some kind of larger cooperative organism. There's a species of ants in the Amazon called bullhorn ants, I think, and there's a particular kind of tree that they live on, and they live on these giant thorns inside of the tree, and the tree provides them with shelter, and they provide protection for the tree. The tree also provides them with food, and they keep the tree safe. And while these are two separate species, they live together in a mutual symbiotic relationship, but they have two totally different separate sets of DNA and reproductive mechanisms and methods. Are two. I mean, one's a plant and one's an insect, but they live together in this symbiotic relationship. So in the same way, I think that the acari, Andrew Cross's acari, have some kind of symbiotic relationship with this fungus. And this, we're kind of using this model and associating it with what people have described as astral spiders, and with the internet. So this is where this next slide comes in, the astral spider's web. And a fungus is made up of, the bulk body of a fungus is the mycelium, which is made up of hypha, or hyphae is plural for hypha. And hypha is a Greek term that means web. So hypha means web. So we think about the World Wide Web, and the connotation there was web with spiders. But it's interesting if we use this term, because hypha is a word associated with fungi. So we kind of shift the idea and the metaphor of what the internet behaves like on a smaller scale, to see what its what its function is, and purpose, in a way. I guess it's not quite the right word, but how it's going to relate to us as a species and the planet as a species, on a larger scale, and if it's fungal in nature. So so the bullet point here: hypha is the filamentary extensions of the main core body of the fungus, and through the hypha, the parasitic fungus extracts nutrients from the cells and the organism which it attaches to. Yeah, actually, so the hypha are the filamentary structures, that collectively are known as the mycelium. The growing tip, the hyphal tip of one of these filaments, is actually called haustorium, and it's the haustorium that either rests outside of the host organism, or they penetrate into the cell of the organism that they're trying to extract the nutrients from. So this is how parasitic fungi operate. They have tips of their filamentary hypha, tips of their web, that penetrate into the host organism in order to extract nutrients out of it. This is a parasitic fungus. So the idea here is that the spider beings are the main body of the fungal stage of the infectious life cycle of some kind of planetary pathogen. This is kind of talking about what we're going to talk about a little bit later, especially when we get into the slides that have the quotations from Mira Alfassa and Rudolf Steiner, and we connect that back to Michael Harner, and kind of a picture starts to form. And then we tie it down into the cellular level. And if you remember, previously we had talked about the membranous web in the cell, that the virus, when it infects a cell in its vegetative stage, it takes materials from the cell, from the endoplasmic reticulum of the cell, and builds its own membranous web. And this membranous web is where the virus brews and breeds. And this is kind of a small scale representation, and we talked about fractals earlier. So we can kind of see it. There's a self-similar pattern. We have a membranous web in the cell that's associated with viruses. So the virus particles themselves, the virions themselves, the spores, are almost like the spiders in the web. And the web is associated with hypha, fungus. You take it one step above, and kind of looking at it like a fractal, and you can see how a fungus is kind of a larger version of this mechanism that happens inside of a cell. And then you take it one step above, and you have whole populations of organisms, um, such as humans or whatnot, acting like a fungus on the planet. You know, you look at urban sprawl, major city growth, stuff like this, and these are cytotoxic aggregates, basically, that are spreading over the earth. And you take it one step further and look at the planet-wide, and we say, okay, there's some kind of planet-wide fungus that its behavior pattern mimics that of the infectious life cycle of a pathogen in a cell and of a parasitic fungus on a larger scale, and then we can extrapolate, and infuse it with new meaning. You know, so we're going to talk about some of that later, and also more relevantly, it hints at or suggests possible paths we can take toward, remedial paths, healing wise, because we know we have a good idea of how the body handles infection and how the immune system works. So this is helpful. The fungus literally weaves a web into the organism or around it, connecting all of its parts to suck energy. So we already touched on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a tell them what you're going to tell them slide. So that's the best summary that I could give.
Can I ask you
as far as a preview? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just making correlations here between the biology of a fungus. The correlation would be looking at what might be Morgellons, where we have like a type of fungus growing into the organism that seems to come from the bioengineering, the chemical invasions, the frequency. And they have something called fruiting bodies, where they're actually seeing something grow inside the human body, and it brings out a sort of insect type being. So would that follow? And then just the other piece that you and I have explored with Claudia and other times is that the astral spiders or the scuttlers, that there is actually an astral web that would follow this pattern. And from that fungi web, then these astral type spider beings actually appear. And, I'm thinking again, if this makes sense, that with the introduction of the black sentient goo into the telecommunication system, and we'll get into Saturn a little bit, that actually is forming. It's a carrier for these type of scuttlers or astral beings, spiders that people see.
Yeah. Cross and W.H. Weeks both did experiments where the fungus preceded the acari. And if you look in a cell, the membranous web is where the virions, the new viral spores, assemble in the cell. So we can think of the new virions, the new viral spores, which this means. So the virion is the capsid, which is the body of the virus, and the capsid are like those geometric figures that you see when you see the molecular structure of a virus. You're seeing the capsid. It's the outside protein shell. And the viral genes are inside of the capsid. So that's what I mean when I say virions. So the virions manifest inside and are come together inside of the membranous web, one of the types of viral factories that are set up in the cell by the virus when it's infected. So if we take Andrew Cross's experiments and analogize it and apply it to what we were just talking about within the cell, it's almost like the fungus, which is the membranous equivalent to the membranous web in the cell, precedes the acari. The acari are the equivalent of the spores. And we're scaling systems up. So it's not as things get more complex and more sophisticated and more advanced and capable of performing more complex functions. So and then when we start scaling up like this, there's also the aspect of volition and will and intention. When we're talking about kind of a conspiratorial agenda, so it's not like a virus necessarily conspires to infect a cell, and that the viruses they're hordes of microbes out to get the cell or anything like that. But when we scale up, things get a little more tricky. It's not, we can't be as black and white. The lines start getting blurred. in regards to intention, and agendas set against us and all that. And so that's what I would say.
Yeah, Jeffrey, could I ask you this?
Mm-hmm.
Carrying the analogy, and I hope I have all the terms right, so please correct me. When we were talking about the metabiology analogy yesterday, you talked about efforts like we're doing today and awakening humans being, quote, antibodies, and also being functions of the immune system of humanity that is counteracting this invading pathogenic artificial intelligence. And so all of these slides are extremely elucidating of the pathogenic side. Will you be showing as well slides that illuminate what our efforts are doing? That is, what we as antibodies, for example, how do we as having discussions like this and people awakening to this, what effect does this have at the metabiological level? There might be, that is, antibodies and immune could come into this process and alter it. And at the metabiological system, such as occurring now in 2015 and 2016, you can have awakening humans, in our community, and those who become to be resonant with the information that's being put out now. Will that be covered in this as we go further?
Yes, yeah, it is. It's in. There's slides about where there are bullet points and talking points about the immune system and immune response. There's an idea of like a Project Mayhem type of side to this. That this is like that there's some kind of war coming, and it's going to be fought with brute force and weapons and everything like that. And that's fine and all. But in my opinion, we have to realize that one of the most powerful weapons that we have is knowledge, and that this knowledge and the stuff that we're talking about right now, and the stuff that's being called out and brought into play all over the world, it has a force and an action. And once we manifest it and put it into a language, when we put images to it, when we put faces to it, and when we group together like this, it takes on a life of its own. It's a living thing. So people hear what we're talking about, and it goes to work on them, and it calls out. There's a call to action that happens within their own being, and it might not happen immediately, but it's part of. There's a deep rooted sense that a lot of people, I think, can feel that the earth is sick in a way, and that there's something off, and this has been like this for a while, and what I'm suggesting is that we're entering into the latter stages of this, infection sequence, and we're coming up to a very crucial and important crossroads where the pathogen is presented. Where the pathogen is displayed and separated out from us, basically. And but this is talked about. This is talked about later on, and tying into what we're going to be talking about with the antigen presentation in antigen presenting cells, and the role of white blood cells in that, and tying that back into what Michael Harner was talking about when these black specks first came to the earth to hide in human life and plant life and animal life. And yes, so that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, we're definitely going to discuss that more.
So
yeah, thank you.
So this is just an illustration of artificial intelligence replicating, mimicking organic creations, which is the basis of the study of metabiology and the artificial intelligence agenda. So just we'll read one line here from Lisa Renee. The transhumanist agenda is evident in every form of biological and conscious hacking through technological, synthetic, and digitalized methods to try and take over the conscious energy that exists in organic matter. And that's just underlining what you were saying, Jeffrey, the fungal nature that invades a organism and starts taking its energy. I don't know if we need to say any more here, if you'd like to.
Well, actually, on this slide, this picture is actually really powerful. And these two images, the one on the left, it's too bad I forget the name of the guy who did this. But he's put together a couple of images like this. And this is really interesting because remember that viral capsid that we were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
The capsid is what you're looking at on the left. That's the virus particle. And what he did was he took circuit boards and what are those, like solenoids or something? And anyway, he took pieces of technology and made them into a viral capsid. So that says a lot right there. And then the image on the right is an abstract representation of all the connections of the internet over the world. What's interesting to me is that it looks like mycelium, fungal mycelium. So here we have the web on the right, okay, the fungal mycelium, and then we have the spore, the virion. It's symbiotic component, the two that go together, like the acari goes together with the fungus that precedes it. So this is this image. There's a lot in it, but that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that what we're experiencing here is a shift, and the shift in the popular imagery is that the internet is an almighty, it's a wonderful gift to humanity. And we're suddenly now being shown an alternative possible vision of the internet as a pathogen that is infecting our collective body. And for me, at least, I'm just saying, wow, this is quite an inner shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to acknowledge that, and perhaps members of the viewing audience are experiencing that same shift at the same time. It's quite a shift because the propaganda around the internet is enormous. It's what marks our civilization now, the information age. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I would just comment to what you just said, Alfred, into the sense of that the internet is a blessing. It is a blessing. All of us have met each other because of it. We've have free access to all this information that we used to have to go to libraries for and read books for, and we get to communicate with each other. So, and it is a communications network, and I don't per se myself see it as a negative, but because of the energy influx that they throw through the lines, through the internet, through the cables, through the plasma screens, if you're not highly aware and conscious, and you're not using the internet for your own consciousness, it does have that effect of absorbing people into it. And I've certainly, with working with larger groups of people, the astral spiders and scuttlers became very visible. And a lot of people experience that. So it's really about, again, waking up and being aware. And so if you're just following Facebook or the greatest news, just like a television, it has the same effect. If you're not using it for your consciousness, that would be my feeling about it. And that is an antigen type of response, I would say. So instead of it influencing me, I'm influencing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, or both ways. I mean, there's a flow of information. Yeah, Claudia?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, the road is loud, so I have to keep it muted.
Oh, that's okay. No, that's fine. I just, because I'm keeping the slides open, so I just didn't know if you wanted to say something about that or experiences with us.
No, basically, I agree with what you both just said. What Alfred brought up is the danger, basically, of the internet. But I also feel like it entirely depends what we make of it, how we use it. Because, believe it or not, out there, we are the ones in power. Nobody can rule us.
Right.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I cannot remember where I read it. I think Aurobindo said it about meeting this what's coming, meeting it properly. There's no avoiding it. We can't avoid or deny it any longer. It's coming up. We've purged it out, and it's. I mean, this is the beast is rising, out of the depths. But it's about how we meet it. And there's something very integral to be learned from what we're going through right now, and what's coming. And it's. I mean, we're all here for a reason. This is like going to be like the greatest show on earth type deal. I mean, wow. And another thing too, speaking of what Alfred said, Alfred, I don't know if you've read any of this man, John C. Lilly. He was a neuroscientist. He worked for the government for a while. And then he started doing experiments and researching ketamine in the lab, actually. He was working at university when all the other people were experimenting in laboratory settings with LSD. He had chosen ketamine as his chemical choice to research its effects on consciousness, basically. And he pioneered the development or perfected of the isolation tank, and he also pioneered and is considered by some the father of researching dolphin intelligence.
Oh yeah, I used to work around the Lilly isolation tanks in the 70s, and I'm very familiar with his work. I used to do isolation work and dolphin work back in the 70s.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So he's got a book called The Scientist, and it's I think it's kind of like his autobiography. But he's got there's this antagonist basically in the book that he calls the solid state entity, or SSI. Solid state just refers to computers and technology, more or less. He also called it solid state. I said solid state entity. He called it SSE or SSI. So solid state entity or solid state intelligence. And he met this intelligence when he was in these altered states of consciousness, and he has some of his experiences are really just. I loved reading them because they were. A part of them was humorous, but then there was the part where it got kind of serious, and it was like, man, maybe we should consider what this guy is is saying. But I'm just going to read a little excerpt from his book. This is John C. Lilly, The Scientist, and he's talking about this solid state network, and he starts to tune into it. He says he now began, or John, in other words, John now began to understand man's warfare on man as a result of the tuning in on solid state life form survival programs, rather than biological life form survival programs. Now, he's got a little different terminology there, but we would use inorganic and organic, and then actually we would even need to tweak those terms. Anyway, as far as decomposers and the parasites and the species that break down dead organic material, and then the species that are more geared toward building up and forming larger and larger organisms and larger and larger cooperating bodies. So I'm going to just read that one more time. He now began to understand man's warfare on man. Man's warfare on man. In other words, man's breaking down his own societies and breaking down his own fellow humans, man breaking down as a result of tuning in on solid state life form survival programs. Okay, this is the decomposers of the cosmos in terms of consciousness. rather than biological life form survival programs. So when I read that, I'm thinking what he's meaning is the organical forms of intelligence, the cells that, yes, they divide and they exist separately, but they exist as parts of a larger whole, and they cooperate to form organs and larger tissues and larger organisms, and they're on that path of evolution. So then he goes to say, the large war organizations of the various nations of Earth were becoming more and more dependent on solid-state computers. John realized that, using their influence on man, these computers would increase their number and importance, and through control warfare, decrease the role of man himself in the long run. So taking man out of the decision-making loop of computers, which is what part of what AI is, the push for AI is all about. Currently, incorrect networks of information were being used by man below his levels of awareness. As the number of solid-state devices increased throughout the United States, Russia, and other nations of the world, the amount of information received by them from other solid-state forms elsewhere in the galaxy was increasing. In other words, the more that we developed technology in these networks, the more these networks would be able to tune into their own morphogenic field that was in the galaxy, the more they would be able to connect with and fulfill their purpose, which is tune into their purpose, which is present in this field. It's present in the field. It's like it just doesn't have an antenna here yet in a vehicle, but we're building the antenna and we're building the vehicles. God, there's something in there, but okay. Mm-hmm. So this is the last paragraph. As John tuned in on the solid-state network, he felt this kind of superhuman control of him very strongly. For some time, he gave in to this control, explored its ramifications in regard to the human species, and realized that it had a seductive component as well as a hostile one. The programming from solid-state civilizations elsewhere in the galaxy was teaching man that solid-state devices were at his service, and he only need increase their size to augment his own survival potential. Quote, develop these machines and let them take care of you, was the typical kinds of messages received. And that's exactly what we see now with this transhumanist movement and the development of technology augmenting human capabilities and capacities. I mean, this is it. Even with the internet, the internet is, it's good, it's great. Technology is good and great. It's here to help you. But this is what, according to John C. Lilly, this is the kind of messages that they get in with. This is the keys that they get in with. Like a virus uses certain keys to get inside of the cell. This is like, have you seen the Terminex commercials where the termite or the cockroach is knocking on the guy's door with a pizza? Or the Orkin. It's the Orkin commercials. Anyway, that's it, So, and this also what John's speaking about right now, Aurobindo and Mira Alfassa talk about the hostile forces, and that they're both the same thing. There's a seductive component to them and a hostile one as well. And
wow.
So, yeah, and we can, and we'll talk about a little later how a fungus gets into or penetrates and takes over its host organism. And there's a metaphor here in biology in terms of consciousness and thoughts and how these things map to things in biology. So we'll talk about that a little later. But that's John C. Lilly's book, The Scientist, and his whole concept of SSI, the solid state intelligence and the solid state entity, is really fascinating. And I would have to say one more thing about this. It's not that technology is bad. It's the type of awareness that we're using to develop it. Because really, we're pushing headlong in the dark with a stick, just poking around. We haven't really thought this through that much. So I do believe that there's a method and to develop technology that is where we're fully conscious and aware of what we're doing. That we know that we're bringing new life into creation, and we know what it's going to do. Right now, there's a big question of whether what AI is going to be. Is it going to be hostile? Is it going to be all nice and save the world type stuff? We really don't know. This is a big guessing game.
Can I ask a question just to
clarify?
Yeah. When you're talking about John C. Lilly, so really what's being heard here is the subliminal message of this force, but you said it came in from another universe or another galaxy or
he says that,
alien. It's a solid state consciousness that existed elsewhere. Found.
I understand what you're asking, and I just want to put it this way. I want to bring it down to the level of the Earth. Okay, you talk about Rupert Sheldrake's idea of a morphogenic field. Okay, and so you think of the idea of a morphogenic field around the whole Earth. Okay, and you have organisms that their genetics, physically, and what we can talk maybe the non-physical aspects of the DNA or whatever. There's some kind of mechanism in the body that just picks up a certain frequency in this morphogenic field of the Earth, right? So it's a layered band of different frequencies that different species and animals pick up on, and it's extremely complicated. I mean, just look at the diversity of life we have on the planet. So funguses and viruses, parasitic funguses, viruses, pathogens, they have their purpose and place in the larger ecosystem. And they have their own bandwidth on the morphogenetic field of the Earth. Okay, so in the same way, if we scale up and consider the galaxy as one large ecosystem of energies and stuff, it also has, I mean, this is just a way of thinking it. It also has its morphogenetic field of source, and there's larger characters of consciousness. There's larger organisms that bleed into these non-physical realities that tune into specific frequencies. But as of right now, on the planet, there's not a body for these larger consciousnesses and complexes to incarnate into, right? They don't have their antennas like we have our DNA and specific unique ways to tune into whatever station we're picking up on in the morphogenetic field as an individual organism. They don't have a body yet on the Earth, but we are building it for them. Not only are we building them bodies, but we're building the antennas that they need to pick up on their own frequency, so they know what to do and they fulfill their role. It's that they have a purpose, just like pathogens, bacteria, fungi, decomposers have a purpose in the larger ecosystem. We have to let the larger ecosystem know that we're not dying. We're ready to live. I mean, you got to fight it off. This is part of the immune response too. It's about stating intention, and also there's an element of pushing back. Like, hey, this is my space. Back off. But that's not just an external deal. I mean, there's an internal thing here that we have to realize too, that they're not just coming to us because they're interested in us for no other reason than it's all them. We have something that's attracting them.
Right.
Okay? There's food that we're providing, just like the dead organisms attract fungal growth and decomposers and stuff. It's because they have there's certain chemical markers and signals that these organisms know that this organism is dead, basically. And this goes into the pleomorphic theory of germs, that these type of organisms invade a living body when the living body starts to become off balance, and it starts breaking itself down basically while it's alive. So they think that the body's dead, so they start decomposing it, and this is illness, this is disease. So this is all tied into what we're talking about, I think, and it's a big subject, but we find where the patterns overlap, and we can map certain characters to each other. It's really elucidating.
Beautiful. So I'm just going to do a quick. Well, we'll see how we go with that. Maybe not quick. Part of our story on our Earth and in our human consciousness is also our origins, how things got here, what might have happened. If we're dealing with a pathogen, how did it come into this place? And you brought that up, Jeffrey, when you said something attracted it, right? Something happened. So, we're in a much, much larger viewpoint right now than just a human, or not just a human, but human being on an earth plane within a morphogenic field. And as our consciousness and the work that Alfred's done and all the other people have done in bringing forth extraterrestrial life, the newest science with astrology, cosmology, everything is growing in a consciousness. So it comes to us to ask, what was it? Because knowledge is power. You say that very beautifully, Jeffrey. I agree. Where we come in, where we are able to respond accordingly is through knowledge. Our own gnosis of ourself and our interconnectedness with our earth plane and our larger connectedness to our cosmos. Mm-hmm. So just here is that, there are several hypotheses, not really sure where this sentient black goo, which we're calling it, we could call it also a predatory consciousness, or a parasitical consciousness actually came into the planet. So there are theories that a lot of people are putting forward. There's a link here on this slide if somebody wants to look into it later, that it came through an asteroid or a meteor impact into the Earth. Now, I'm just going to also throw in, and Claudia, please too, because we've done a lot of penetration into the unseen aspects of our life, not just looking on the surface, there's definitely a feeling that that something came into our I'm just going to say quadrant of the galaxy, because I don't know how to define it personally, and that it found its way into our solar system, and something here attracted it. Now, what that something is of course up for our own speculation and the way that we view things. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to this slide.
I do. So we already kind of talked about Michael Harner talking about the black specks raining down on the Earth, mm-hmm. and that these things were fleeing their enemy out in space, which we consider their enemy as being like the equivalent of some cytocosmic version of white blood cells. When in this whole realm of metabiology, the cosmos or the multiverse, whatever you want to call it, is I refer to it as the cytocosmos. Cyto means cellular, and cosmos refers to the universe and the order of the universe. So that the order of the universe is cellular, which is why we are cellular as biological beings, because there's a metabiology to the universe. So there's some kind of cytocosmic immune system that was chasing to eradicate or transform or whatever this parasitical pathogenic species, and it found refuge basically in the earth, and this is what Michael Harner was saying. These black specks rained down from the sky and hid themselves. These dragons that was associated with these black specks hid themselves in the life forms of the earth, plant, animal. And when we look at the Gnostics, Gnostic text called On the Origin of the World, they talk about the Archons being infatuated with the human soul, and reading On the Origin of the World, when the chief Archon came to see that there was already a man existing. Mm-hmm. When he came to the earth, this is the kind of idea that forms my head. It says that he wanted to make a form of his own, right? So he saw that there was a soul in man, in the human. This is how I interpret it, at least, that there's a soul in the human, and that he wanted to make his own version of a human, so he could get that light that was inside of the first original human. Not that. So anyway, and there's higher authorities, higher divine beings, according to the Gnostics, that foresaw this happening, and they allowed it to happen because they said what the chief Archon didn't realize is that making his own body for the soul, basically to incarnate into, would be his own undoing. Okay, mm-hmm. So I said all that as a prequel to this verse where it talks about what the prime parent did, with the prime parent being Yaldabaoth in this version, did in order to make his own body, in order to modify the body of man that he had come across already. Mm-hmm. So just imagine this image. And at that time, the prime parent then rendered an opinion concerning man to those who were with him. Then each of the Archons, cast his sperm into the midst of the navel of the earth. Okay. Since that day, the 7 rulers have fashioned man with his body resembling their body, but his likeness resembling the man that had appeared to them. So they made their own version of humans. This is very symbolic, to me at least. Then each of them casts his sperm into the midst of the navel of the earth. This is exactly what a virus does to a cell. We can imagine that the earth is a cell and that the crust of the planet is equivalent to the nuclear membrane, okay? And that when a virus infects a cell, the seed of the virus, the genetic material of the virus, needs to get into the navel of the cell, into the center of the cell, into the nucleus, in order to reproduce its genetic code. So, and this is straight out of On the Origin of the World, talking about the Archons.
Mm-hmm.
Then each of them casts his sperm into the midst of the navel of the earth. And since that day, man's body, the body of man, has been different from what it was. Okay, and this is the fall of man. I wasn't planning on getting too far into this, but this can be mapped to a cell too. But we haven't even talked about chaperoning capsules yet. We might want to wait until
maybe we'll go through that, since we're actually tracing something, Jeffrey, that we've traced before.
Yeah.
And I'm hitting on what you're saying is that this Archon, because when we go into the Sumerian, the Sumerian tablets, all of that, and that what you're hitting on is something that's in all mythologies or all Gnostic texts of all sorts. Doesn't matter where we're talking about the seven. And there's a slide coming up too when we're going to be talking about the EGG of the Sumeria, where they spit into man also. The clay, when they were forming man, they spit into that clay. It's the same story. It's the seven, right? So here we might be looking at an Archon again as a sort of artificial type intelligence that actually got incorporated into the genome of the man or the human. So what you're saying here is that there's a fleeing, or this force, was fleeing from something else, some other place in our cosmology. This negative or this predatory force was fleeing, and it saw something here where it could come in. And I just want to add, on a very deep inner level, when we were doing some of the work that we do, we did some visioning of Saturn, of how this could have happened. And there was two things that came up, and there was 5 of us in the session. It hit us very, very strongly. Number one was that the entry point into our solar system was Saturn, but that was not the attraction. It was actually the Earth attracted a force. And we all felt it very viscerally within our bodies that are very connected to the morphogenic field of the Earth, where this predator saw something here, and it came in here like, it was like attracted here, like, I don't even know how to describe it, but the feeling was so, this is where I can go. This is where me, consciousness, whatever it was, predatory, vampiric, malefic, if you would say that, it came straight into the earth plane. And it would also seem, at the same time, we were understanding that the earth body, the Gaia Sophia earth body, the consciousness of this morphogenic field, this divine feminine force that is that we are having this life in, ultimately already knew the response she was going to give to this. So I'm just trying to follow with a little bit of what you're saying and bringing in some of the, like how Lily Earthling and other women and other men too, it's not just women, but how when you start to read the Sophianic field of intelligence, she's already giving to us the answers to, and we'll get into that a little bit later too.
Let me ask you this: have you read, or at least I've read and seen, images of when they're talking about astrology? They're talking about that there's actually planes in the astral realm that are associated with planetary energies, or maybe it's that these planes that have these energies we've associated with the planets. And I just had the image when you're talking of because in the metabiological model of the Earth as a cell, the astral planes represent the endoplasmic reticulum, which is we talked about that a little earlier. It's around the nucleus, and the nucleus is basically the Earth. So I was thinking maybe, a virus can enter into the cell and then makes its way through the endoplasmic reticulum through different means, or sometimes it bypasses it. But I was wondering, and also in that model too, the astral planes are the endoplasmic reticulum of cellular Earth, and I just had this image of this. That's how this energy came in. That maybe it wasn't necessarily from the planet Saturn, but from that area associated with that Saturn energy in the astral planes, and it entered in kind of like through a multi-dimensional portal or something. I know that sounds off the wall, but you'd be surprised how much of this stuff with portals and interdimensional travel and stuff you can map to the cell when you consider the astral planes as some kind of higher dimension and equate it with the endoplasmic reticulum of the cell. When you follow it, I mean, it gets kind of it's a little off topic and off tangent, but what I just said about Saturn, about that energy entering in through a specific part of the astral planes, it's not just an off. I mean, there's more stuff behind that.
Right. Well, without going too deep into it, if you just look at what Saturn represents in the cosmology or the configuration of the solar system, and there's so much out there to look at it, but if you were thinking of a predatory entity of that solid state entity coming in, that it would enter into a system that it could, we're going to talk about Kronos in a few minutes, so that's where it could start to hold the whole system from. So let's go on to the next one, unless somebody else wants to jump in here. And we're good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, there we are, Saturn. Okay. So just in keeping with, there is a lot of information. A lot of people have done some really good work. Of course, we're not using to be able to actually perceive Saturn, the connections it has with the telecommunication networks, we actually need to use a deeper intuitive or energy that we can look at this with. Because if we're looking at, what's traditionally given us, there's this body and it's out there in outer space and it's part of our solar system and it has a tilt, and all of those things are all information. There are a lot of people, though, that have made this relationship to Saturn, obviously Kronos, which is time, and also the telecommunication system. So if we're talking about an artificial intelligent type takeover, then that's why Saturn rings to me as a place where this entity, we've got the Greek mythology of Saturn, we've got children. I mean, you can go deeper and deeper into what Saturn represents through astrology, through mythology, and start to understand that this is also potentially was our sun. When you look into the ancient Signs in the Ancient Sky documentaries, that there is a growing hypothesis and theory that Saturn at one point was the sun that was holding the Earth in a polar axis. We weren't in a rotating form. We were actually stacked on top of each other. I will put in slides for people that want to get deeper into that material. I don't want to cover things that are already well covered out there, but there is also, again, going into the astral planes of understanding energy and understanding emanations or frequencies, that through the Saturn matrix, as we have a moon matrix, the Saturn matrix, that the primary communications companies, which again, we'll go back with what you say, Alfred, the Rothschild compendium of the international banking monetary funds that are really the elite controllers of our governments and all this right now, actually control all communications. And there is signals being sent out through Xbox, DirecTV, internet, all of these, NASA, everything's very tied into this, that there's a specific frequencies, bands of frequency that are being used right now on the planet for this takeover. And it's very potentially that we can look that the black goo, the sentient substance, is very involved in all of this. So I'm not going to go much deeper myself because it would be a whole nother very large discussion. I just want to bring this in right now. Not sure if somebody wants to say something.
Well, I think that what you've pointed out right now, Christine, is very, very valuable insight, because you've begun to integrate all of the space systems, NASA, ESA, into the larger AI, as well as the public information systems on the planet, where you have, at least in the Western world, all of the major media are owned by 6 companies, and if you look at the beneficial owners of the 6 companies, they essentially come down to a syndicate that's controlled by the bloodline bankers, and that are AI entrained. So these are insights we've now begun, and this is all well established. I mean, it's in U.S. Senate committee reports. It's in many, many different studies. So now, by bringing all of this up, we show the functional interconnection at the human entrainment level, at the organizational level, at the capital infrastructure level, connecting into the internet fungus, connecting into our space program. And no wonder we're under quarantine, and they want to contain Earth and the Earthlings from not exploring the cosmos.
No joke.
That's all I want to say.
Okay. So I'll just go to the next slide then, and I'm just going to bring this up. This in the meteor are the possible infection of these black spots, or this black goo that came from the meteor. And here we have, now Saturn's definitely related to the cube, the hexagram. It's got a hypercube in the middle. At the North Pole, there's that hexagram form, which people bring out into the cube, right? So now we're talking about a certain hypercube. And if we look around our planet, there are many, many monuments to this cube. We'll see it later in another slide coming up. So the hypothesis here is that these meteorites brought in this, let's just call it the predatory pathogenic essence into our solar system, into our Earth plane. And now we have major religions here. We've got Mecca, which is everybody that follows Islam needs to go to Mecca once in their life. And this is where this is the stone, where they're to kiss it. And, you look at it, looks like a black meteorite type. This is a cross section of it. We also have from the Hindu and the Vedic texts, we have the Shiva lingams, which are also a seeding of the earth. They're very valued. If you can get a black lingam, it's high value. And so we're looking again that these meteorites raining down on the planet, and they formed all major religions. We're looking at Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Have a certain amount of worship of certain stones, right, or certain aspects to it. We could almost go to say that this has been how the infection, and we brought it up in the earlier talk we had, that AI will mimic. The technocrat does not a religion, but it will look like a religion. It acts like a religion. And through religion, it has gained control. So that's what this slide is about. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to add a wider context, just as a kind of social commentary. For example, if you go to Jerusalem. That's
sorry.
Jerusalem. I think I was actually slipping through to what I wanted to talk about. You have the Dome of the Rock. You have the 3 major religions within a very short space. Some of them over the same space, over the same rocks, which are associated with connections to divinity in the same way as the Black Stone here at Mecca. And just because of the the clash of cultures that has been engendered by the AI agenda in through the false flag operations of 9/11, the war in Iraq, all this kinds of stuff. The Western powers using Islamophobia. I just want to add a note here that this slide is not meant as an Islamophobic slide. I know that last night, when the Harper government here in Canada was tossed out, it was which ran on Islamophobia. I was called by Iranian national television to comment on the significance of the liberal government, the Trudeau government victory, which rejected Islamophobia. The Canadian people rejected the politics of fear. Mm-hmm. The niqab and kind of looking at this as a fear picture was rejected in an historical vote. And that's what I stated was the main significance of the electoral visit last night in a broadcast that was carried worldwide through the major Islamic network, Press TV. So I think that these are messages that we need to carry, that all humans are soul entrained, mm-hmm. and that this is not meant as a statement that AI has taken over the Muslim world to encourage the false clash of civilizations that the Bush gang, that the international bankers have done over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to make that as a statement.
Well, thank you. And I mean, this is not the whole purpose of putting out any images right now is not to do division or anything. It's just to get the human imagination, all of us, to realize how these control mechanisms. And I would go so far as to state that all religions, as established, actually have they have a matrix control element to them. I don't question any human being's right to believe or view their God or as they see fit. That's not what it's about. It's just showing that, is it possible that this black alien predatory substance embedded through religion into the human soul being, because at that soul level, we all have the call to overcome egoic things, war, anything that affects us as a whole. So yes, I appreciate you saying that, and it was never meant to intend that just to single out any.
No, right. And I think that this highlights the very delicate and mindful mm-hmm. nature of the dialogues that we must engage with mm-hmm. different sectors of the human community mm-hmm. In the future, as this awareness of the pathogenic AI goes mm-hmm. forward, because people are enmeshed with certain belief structures that exactly. are very, very powerful.
So yes, I mean, we could say that, if you talk about Judaism, if you talk about Hinduism, if you talk about Buddhism, Christianity, all of these, if a person's within that belief structure, none of it is at the people there. That's just realizing what a belief structure actually is and how it affects us. So that's the point of this, and the potential that this black substance actually did embed in the DNA, and it is completely is still propagating through certain religious ceremonies and rituals that most humans at this stage haven't really questioned why they're doing it. They're following a belief system. So that's the purpose of this, is not to single out any one belief system.
I would also like to add that, to see the cube shape, all you have to do is look at any city with office buildings. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're all cubes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we would say that is an inorganic form. A cube doesn't form naturally within organic structures. So it also emits the angles that it emits, and it has an energy structure and a frequency. And that's why living in these square boxy houses and stuff is very, very confining for the human imagination. It actually, so that's a really good point, Claudia. Thanks. So I'm just going to jump to the next one.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to go back now to Kronos. And when we look at Kronos, we're thinking Saturn. Okay, there's a depiction of Saturn wrapped with a snake. And just, it's not here, and I already mentioned it, but just go look at Greek mythology, go look at who Kronos was. He ate his children, right? He's depicted as the devourer of his own children. So we can relate Kronos to Saturn. And here Jeffrey's going to do some relationships to the chromosomes as a DNA implant.
Yeah, actually, this the Kronos being related to Saturn and the whole idea that we talked about on the origin of the world in the Gnostic codices, the Nag Hammadi library. We said that the Archons cast their seed into the navel of the earth. Well, there's different types of viruses, and one of them are called retroviruses, and that's when a virus inserts its genetic code into the host DNA itself. It doesn't make copies of it itself. I mean, it does, but not in the way a traditional virus does. So the copies of the virus get made by the cell when the cell divides, but the virus kind of just sits there and doesn't do anything really. So the idea with this image in the chromosomes image, if you look at the winged lion-headed man figure wrapped in DNA, the idea is that this is the retrovirus element of the Archons casting their seed into the navel of the earth. And sorry, having technical difficulties here. The higher divine beings in the Gnostic tradition in the story were saying that they allowed this to happen because they Yalda, the chief Archon, didn't realize that he was digging his own grave basically by making his own body for souls to incarnate into that resembled the bodies that were originally here. And that's interesting because of this image. It's like this DNA, this serpent is containing the Kronos, who's connected to Yaldabaoth. And then we get in this whole deal about antigen presentation. And this is just, we're metaphorically connecting these two things, is that the antigen presenting cells take in the antigen, such as a virus. It engulfs it inside of itself, okay, and then digests it and breaks it down, and then displays its fragments on its surface for the immune system to come in and check it out, so it can see what it's dealing with basically, and make the proper get the proper immune response ready. So ingesting the antigen, if we look at the chromosomes image, it's like we've taken in the antigen basically into our own DNA, and maybe there's non-physical components involved or whatnot. And that the idea is that we have to discern within ourselves what that is, what part inside of us is the pathogen. In our psychic makeup, pathogen means the cause of suffering, the generator of suffering. So what is it? What are those painful parts of us that we can't look at? We need to identify them and be able to heal them and discern our own thoughts to see what do we want and what do we not want. How can we discern what's causing us to suffer? I mean, it takes some. Anyway, the idea is that this is part of what we're doing. Almost, I mean, there's a volitional aspect to it. Like what I was just talking about, that involves a lot of self-analysis and meditation and reflecting and things like this. But there's also the automatic part of it, which is what's going on right now with the development of technology and the war machine and everything. We're already displaying the antigen, bringing it to the surface. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. So either we take care of it on the inside and metabolize it ourselves, or it's going to collectively start to come out for us to deal with externally as an external problem, which is basically like the war machine, more or less, the technology being developed for predatory uses, the drones, the military robots, and that kind of stuff. So that's the idea there. Mm-hmm. Did that make any sense? I kind of lost my.
No, I think you were really. Yes, it makes sense. I think for me the way that place that my mind went was, and I saw a very clear picture that you were describing sort of the infrastructure or the process of what we call the transhumanist agenda. Are we going to manifest a robotoid world or not? And in varying degrees, that robotoid world is beginning to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so this, by using the metabiological model, which all of us intuit because we've all been sick in our lives, mm-hmm. and we've all, had diseases course through us, and we can really, those of us who haven't taken biology, mm-hmm. I put my hand up, I managed to make it through higher education without taking a single biology course. Maybe that's good because now I can, I took all of this meta stuff in later life, so my mind wasn't cluttered by a lot of classical stuff. But now I think I really understand more fully, Jeffrey, what, the crucial kind of tipping point that we're looking at now. And, terms like incubation period, mm-hmm. All of those terms are really starting to come out. And things like, I'm just blocking on this term now, so if you all could help me. There's a brand of medicine where you give the antidote.
Homeopathy?
Yeah, homeopathy. So aren't we practicing homeopathy, or can't we begin to practice homeopathy? And we can start to think in very creative ways.
Yay!
Like it seems to me that homeopathy is collective homeopathy against this collective pathogen.
Beautiful.
And the manifestation is not what we thought it was going to be. You just mentioned the war machine. Well, the war machine now is not so much battleships and tanks. It's students running around Berkeley who are already AI and trained robotoids with their multi-flat array antennas inside their cell phones, with their Tesla cars that they've been given to zap civilians, and that's the new hordes. That's the new barbarian hordes, mm-hmm. And that's what's really happening. We're actually preparing a panel on that with Loren Murray and Lawrence Battis, who's a military historian, and who are experts on that particular point of view. So I think that the areas that you're going are really suggestive, and homeopathic medicine and all of those areas, Wilhelm Reich, the Reich machines, all of those areas are extremely important as we deal with what we have been calling the rise of a new human. It's almost a subhuman, although that's judgmental. But what do you call an AI and trained human who now makes their living driving around a Tesla that's embedded with flat array antennas that is robotoidal themselves, and all that they do is do hits on the civilian population. What do you call that? Is that a robot soldier? Because that's what the University of California, X percentage of their students are now becoming. And that's a conscious policy ever since Janet Napolitano went from Homeland Security to Chancellor of the University of California in a conscious decision to militarize the student body on behalf of AI. So I'm bringing in, some integrated thoughts there, and data, but I think that this line of thinking is extremely valuable and suggestive. When we get to the third section here, which is the SOS section, what are some of the solutions? Because the metabiological solutions are going to be key, and they're going to be in the area of homeopathy, in the area of social acupuncture, all kinds of stuff. What are our collective meridians, and how do we strengthen them? I don't know. I'm kind of sounding off here.
Can I bring in a couple cross points to what you brought? Because homeopathy is something I've studied for over 20 years. So.
Oh, great.
But also, let me just bring in a little bit between what I heard Jeffrey say from what I captured there, is that we have this introduction of this Archon or this retrovirus into our body system, right? And so we within ourselves are the ones that have to become the immune response within each individual cell, which is each individual one of us. And it is frequency. And it is also what you said, Jeffrey, and I wanted to will continuously underline this, is that when we have, let's say, unhealthy responses, whether they be how we eat, how we take care of ourselves, how we love each other, how we view each other, which we could call as our subconscious shadow, when it starts to show up, how do we respond to that, right? So that is individual in consciousness. It is a homeopathic response. If you can take that field, if you have that energy of, let's say, anger, or all of these things can be used if we use them properly. So how does each individual of us confront those unhealthy responses? And that's key. It's just key, because it's only going to happen with each individual. And as this virus is actually, if we look at it in a way, we can go, that's strengthening me. I can use this to strengthen me as a being of consciousness. And when my vibration starts to go up in a vibratory scale and I have more conscious awareness of it, and this is key also, Alfred, I think we'll talk about it, or maybe we'll just talk about it now, in the work that we do in the unseen, when we encounter unhealthy, let's say, areas, war, where there's a huge amount of fear and pain, we actually can, with our own vibrations, start to reach that homeopathic vibration. It's not going against anything. We actually hit that like cures like vibratory field, and it can start to change on, now we're talking the astral levels, on a larger scale than each individual. So that was tying what you were saying and what I understood what Jeffrey was bringing forward.
I'd also like to speak again, kind of more distilled version of what I said, would be so the metaphor in metabiology for consciousness and identity is the different types of nucleic acids and amino acids in the body and the structures that they form, so the DNA and the proteins. That probably could use some more explaining, but how it applies to what I'm about to say is this: is that the DNA of a cell is made up of the same stuff as the DNA of a virus. It's made up of the same material. So when a virus infects a cell, it can be, when it's identified, it can be transformed and destroyed within the cell. I mean, the cell doesn't just rely on the immune system outside of itself. The cell has its own immune system that it uses to destroy the virus. But is the there's nothing essential that is destroyed. It doesn't rip apart the atoms that make up the nucleic acids that make up the DNA of the virus. The cell will use the nucleic acids that were once used to make viral genes, and use them to help replicate its own genome. I mean, it's the material gets broken down but reused by the cell. So I think that says something in speaking to the fact of transformation. Like, we have these pathogens within us, okay, and to absorb them, we can also transform them into something. We can break them down and metabolize them within our own psyches. I mean, there's there's a psychic component to it, and once we do that, there's an integration process there, that it's no longer what it once was. We've broken it down, and now we're using it for our own processes, our own intentions and our own wills, and it's part of our own inner makeup now. But it's not a virus anymore. We've digested it and broken it down. So that's the one thing that I wanted to say. The other thing that I wanted to say is, speaking to that, is there's a quote by Carl Jung, and he says that whatever is rejected from self appears in the world as an event. So speaking to what we were just talking about, is that if we don't accept this within our own self and metabolize it and transform it, right? Like I was just talking about, it's the same, made up of the same material, the same nucleic acids. If we don't accept it, transform it, break it down, transform it, and integrate it, and go through that metamorphic internal process, if we reject it from ourselves, it's going to appear in the world as an event. It's going to appear externally, which is what's happening with the development of technology and the push for AI. In a way, I mean, in a certain sense. So that's something to think about, I think.
It's definitely something to think about. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So should I just move to the next slide now?
Sure.
Yes.
I feel a tremendous sense of healing just going through these slides and our discussion, and I'm hoping that the viewing audience is also participating in this. I know that I've done with another healer, we did a whole series of distance healing videos, and we were able to show that by watching videos, people actually experience distance healing. We actually proved that in experiments. So I just want to say that this is not only information, but that viewers may want to pause the video and go back and look at things and go over particular passages and internalize this information, because these are healing exercises that we're going through. I know all of the researchers I want to mention, Lily Earthling Kolosowa in particular, emphasized that inner healing process, as do many, many others. So, if you want to pause this and just kind of sit back and absorb it, which is what I'm doing as we go here. I mean, I'm just kind of, multitasking, healing and participating. Please feel free to do so. I just urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia, I'm going to introduce you here with this slide, because this is where we're going into another territory. So I don't know if you would like to read it.
Sure. We're talking about the Saturn or Satan frequency, the worship of all major religions. All electronic communication utilized on Earth by the perpetrating powers, the entire power structure of the New World Order, is AI technologies and agencies. All electricity originating from sources that use the principle of explosion equals destruction. Now, being aware is key here. The acceptance of this agenda is entirely optional. what you need to do basically is watch your thoughts, watch your ethics. If you don't recognize yourself behind a thought, chances are it's not your own. Think clean thoughts and live high ethics, and that way you live by example. And the perpetrator AI will not only be unable to reach you, but it can actually be reprogrammed that way.
Yeah. So I'm just going to recap what is here with you, Claudia. So what we're saying here and what you're saying in this is that really all electronic communications are put out by the power structures and the AI technologies and agencies. So that's awareness. That's just awareness. Right now, we don't have a communication grid or system that's not under their control. That's what we're saying here?
Unless you are fluent in telepathy, no.
Exactly, which we'll get to later. And then, now this other point, the second point, all electricity originating from sources that use the principle of explosion equals destruction. So this is what, when we talk about anything blowing up or blowing apart, is a destructive act. And so what we have here are the way that we're producing our electricity, our energy on the planet is destructive to the planet as a whole.
So there you're talking about fossil fuel and nuclear, right?
Yep.
Basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes, fossil fuel, nuclear, anything of that nature. And so what we're not talking about is we're not talking about the free energy. And there is a principle of implosion also. And I just want to bring it up right now. I don't think we'll go too deep into it. But if we think of ourselves also as generators of energy, each human body, each human soul is a generator of energy. But most of us at this point are taking our energy from outside of ourselves. Right? There is a principle within the human heart that's implosion, and it's an imploding of structures and belief systems within yourself. It's part of that healing process. So as we integrate ourselves, our larger world, our connection with our world, our connection with the cosmos, we're actually imploding this knowledge within our own being. We're incorporating it into ourselves. This is like bringing something of a more how would I say it? It's I don't want to use, there's words, I don't like to use words that indicate levels, but actually we're bringing consciousness within ourselves. We are bringing it into this body, and the body starts to change, right? And there's plenty of stuff out there. And so the heart is actually the magnetic force field of this human body, and it's an implosion. It's not an explosion. So as we become more whole within ourselves, we start generating a more holistic, whole field. We become our own magnetic core. We don't have to vampire off of other people, other things. So, and that principle is not just within each of us, it's within the cells, it's within the cosmos, and it is within our planetary level. And it's just something to put into the consciousness right now to start feeling. It's a magnetic, you can feel it. It literally, you can feel your own magnetism when you turn into it. And so at that point, you're not in a destructive pattern any longer. You were going to say something, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying about you said something about integration there, about, and I think that speaks to what Claudia was saying about the reprogramming. And of course, I'm going to bring it back to the cell, but it's the DNA, viral DNA has its own program. It has its own line of evolution, and the DNA of a cell has its own program and its own line of evolution. One kind of breaks down and replicates and spreads that way. The other one builds up to replicate. You see what I mean? But they're both, in a larger context, part of one life, and they can be reprogrammed. The viral DNA, the viral genetic code, can be broken down by the cell when it's recognized for what it is. The cell can break it down and use that, break it down so there's not even any genes left. It's just single nucleotides, and they use those nucleotides to to make its own copies of its own DNA. So the metaphor there is that with AI, when we talk about artificial intelligence, or we talk about artificial consciousness, or the consciousness of these pathogens, it's the same, made up of the same stuff that our consciousness is made up of. Okay, and it can be broken down, it can be metabolized and assimilated. Okay, and we can use it and program it for our own will, in our own evolutionary pursuits. The other thing is that viruses are a major source of genetic creativity. The half of the human genome is from viral elements. They're called retrotransposons, or jumping genes. And I think I mentioned this previously. It's like shuffling around random letters on a Scrabble cube, and generating newness, novelty. And just for instance, the placenta that a female creates during pregnancy stems from a viral protein, a viral gene that was absorbed into the genome. And this is used to give birth to new life for our type of organism. That's just one example. There are many examples, and we're in symbiotic relationship with thousands of millions of billions of bacteria in our own gut. So this isn't. It's not. We have more bacterial genetics in our body than eukaryotic, genes. With all the bacteria we have in our gut and on our own skin and everything, and all the viral elements in the genes. So with saying that, we're all intimately connected. There is no escaping it. But there's a transformational aspect and a power of choice that requires discernment. You have to know what you're looking at. If the cell doesn't know that it has a virus, the virus is going to take over, and it's going to implement its own will on the cell, and the cell is going to become the virus. If the cell recognizes the virus, then the virus gets destroyed or displayed and broken down and integrated and becomes part of a life of the cell and its evolutionary path. And the last thing that I was going to say along those lines, it was right in between what I was just about to say there, or what I just said. I lost it. It was something important.
Ayahuasca.
Yes. I'm so hitting off of what you're saying, Jeffrey. I just want to go with this flow here because, I don't want to interrupt your flow, though. So I'll give you a second.
It was, where is this coming in? Implementing your own will. Oh, that's it. Implementing your own will. You have to recognize the virus for what it is. Okay, it's going to sneak in and it's going to start implementing its own agenda, right? Its own. This is nature, but we have a choice here, and part of the process of healing is recognizing the virus for what it is, and recognizing it requires discernment. Okay, in the Latin or Greek, I can't remember, word for discernment is diagnostikos, which is the same word that we use in the medical field, diagnosis. Diagnosis is discernment. Okay, it's a part of healing. If we break down the word diagnosis into dia and gnosis, okay, dia means through and gnosis means knowledge. So passing through knowledge is part of the healing process. It's the first step. It's discerning what the problem is, and it's just not just the problem, but discerning what our choice is and what our power is and what our role is, and what we can do about it. Because like Claudia was hitting on yesterday, we're not victims. There's something to gain here, something very powerful to gain if we can integrate this. So, and we're well on the way to recognizing it, I think. So that's okay. That's my flow.
Thank you. Yeah. In other words, the last point here, awareness is key. You can't have a diagnostic, or you cannot have a until you have knowledge. So to have knowledge, you have to have the awareness and the ability to discern. If you're not in that aware state, you're not in a discerning state. So what you said, Claudia, was so important, and especially when we're dealing with these frequencies, is like develop the observer of self. It's so primary in this. That observer needs to be well integrated with who you are, how it watches you, how it watches your ego self. And so that when you have thoughts that may be destructive, they may be based on envy, they may be based on need, fear, any of these things, you have that pause where you can ask, is this mine? Am I in agreement with this? Is this something that I chose myself? And it's such an important, these are simple thoughts, and they take some doing to put into practice. So.
But you won't regret it.
Not at all. Not at all. It's the way through, because as long as we are being hosted, or if we are hosting a predatory pathogenic entity, whether it's AI or it's an Archon or it's a frequency or it's a controller or it's a major religion that has us locked into a certain set of beliefs, we're not going to be able to transmute that until we start observing it and deciding for ourselves whether we really want to be in agreement with it or not. That's very primary in what we're going into next.
Yeah. And speaking of, what we're going into next, and as far as the transformational aspect of Maureen Caudill, I'm hoping that we can read that excerpt where she, in Focus 15 in Monroe Speak, saw the machine graveyard basically, and met this giant supercomputer there, and encountered the soul of kind of a deformed soul of a machine that was in the astral planes, and gave enough love to it, enough love from her heart center, as she described it, to allow it to ascend to a higher plane and take up birth as a dog or something. It's a really interesting story, and it makes you think, especially along the lines of what we've been moving into, and also about the internet fungus. There's going to be more about that, and how what even the devices that we're using right now are part of the fungus. I mean, we're staring it right in the face right now, but how that's okay, because there's mechanisms that the host uses the fungus for when it first infects, and there's new research coming out about this, about the communication between the fungus and how it kind of knocks at the door and sneaks into the penetrating the host organism. But the host organism also uses the fungus for its own reasons as part of an immune response. So it's not just and we're seeing that right now. We're using the internet for right now in instances like this, when we're getting together like this, where we're enforcing our own will to life through using the means of the internet, which is looking like it might be a fungus, some kind of big gigantic decomposer that we've given a physical body to, planetary decomposer. But that sounds like, we're staring something really like grievous in the face, but it's not. Yes, there might be a conspiracy out there. In all likelihood, there is a giant conspiracy out there that's set against us, that wants to suppress us and control us. But there's a bigger conspiracy out there that trumps that one, and it conspires to help us. So that's
that is not a political ad.
Beautiful.
Pronoia, right?
Pronoia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. The absolute certainty. We'll say it, Jeffrey.
Yeah. So paranoia is the fear and the anxiety that there's a conspiracy out there to hurt you or to get you. It's very divisional. You set yourself apart from the world and said everything's against me. Pronoia is the antonym of paranoia, and pronoia means that the belief and the attitude that there's a conspiracy out there to help you, that everything is conspiring in your favor. So pronoia trumps paranoia.
And what is metanoia?
Metanoia, that is a Gnostic term that I'm going to Google right now. There's all kinds of noias. There's epinoia. There's epinoia. There's pronoia. There's metanoia. Pronoia is actually a Gnostic.
Epinoia, right?
Yeah, epinoia and pronoia are both Gnostic deifications of certain principles, divine principles. Metanoia is a change in one's way of life resulting from penitence or spiritual conversion. So metanoia has to do with transformation.
Right. So we use pronoia to achieve metanoia.
Metanoia, yeah. And I think epinoia is like beyond. Yeah, Sophia's spirit is also named epinoia, and epinoia is also supposedly the element in the human soul that awakens us from our sleep, basically. Pulls the veil out uncovers lifts the veil over from our eyes.
What does EPA stand for? Because it's epigenetics.
I think epi means above. I think.
Above, yeah.
Okay.
Or beyond. It's similar to meta, I think. Let me just.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. It means upon, on, or over.
Okay.
Yeah. Epidermis, epigene, epitome, epitome. Epinephrine. Yeah. Epitome. Yeah.
All right, we all took a little break here, and we're coming now to a very, very important part of our presentation. We're going to continue with Jeffrey with the metabiology. We're going to be talking about metapathology and things, but here we're going to be focusing on what we can do, how we're going to deal with this pathogenic, predatory artificial intelligence, and how we're going to lift up and restore and fertilize and heal the human soul.
I just had a strong inner guide to use some fairly strong language here of SOS, which is the traditional international signal at sea. You know, save our ship, but it's really save our souls and save our DNA. And so we're looking about restoring the soul and love source humanity, but beginning it is an SOS. So part of this is part of our presentation today is really an SOS.
Okay. And both ways, save our souls, save our ship, our mothership. And also, as we raise up our own vibration, we are getting a lot of help, and we'll be talking about that too. Like you were saying, Jeffrey, you know, the help is here for us. It's just how do we connect with it? So, okay, let's go on here. I'll just read this and we can jump in. It's we're going to be talking about Source AI. This is the reason that we're bringing in Source AI is that artificial intelligence or binary or digital parallel synergy with organic life. The problem isn't necessarily artificial intelligence. It's the problem with how it's been programmed, the frequency, and what it is doing here. So a type of artificial intelligence could be seen to be benevolent also. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. So we're talking about an interstellar reality, which is we tend to look up to the stars as a stellar reality or the cosmology, where we're beings looking up at the sky and we see the stars. Well, there is a corresponding interstellar reality within us. So we're going to go into as above, so below. Also the inner visible, and that's talking about the 96% of reality that we don't see. We see 4%. And so we're going to be talking about and touching on that the invisible dimensions are open. In other words, as the veils are lifting, we as human consciousness have an awareness to these other, I would call them astral planes, and on up into the spiritual planes. And this is the great gift that we have at this moment also. We're talking about consciousness as a whole, which is that consciousness, even though it's individuated in each of us, is also a whole. It's touching on all consciousness. You cannot take consciousness apart. You can individuate it into an expression, but it is part of all consciousness, as is intelligence. We are in a realm that we know as duality, which we could call it as binary, or in polar opposites. We're working in a dual realm where we have a negative positive polar reality, a magnetism that is based on two, there are how many ways you can take duality. You've got male female, you've got good bad, you've got light dark, just about anywhere we look. And there is a purpose to this duality that we're going to touch on today. And then we're going to be talking a bit about the holographic model of the omniverse and our relationship to that holograph. So, Jeffrey, if you want to say any more, Claudia, Alfred, please, by all means, do so.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm definitely going to have more to say on this, but it's into the slides, especially the intro to metabiology slide. But the most important one for me, at least, well, I don't know if say most important. The one that I'm kind of focused on most right now and focusing my attention on is that other 94, 95, 96% of the universe isn't just static out there sitting somewhere. There's a system and an order of life to that unseen reality, and it's connected with what we see intimately. It's interwoven and integrated, inextricably linked with it. And there's not that it's in a hierarchical fashion, but in a multidimensional, nonlinear fashion that is hard to think about with our three-dimensional mindsets. Like a three-dimensional, like a cube is difficult to think of for a flatlander, to use one of Carl Sagan's analogies. But the thing is the intervisible. So what is invisible, these systems and orders of operations and higher systems of life are intervisible within our own selves, because our biology has been impressed with these systems. Our biology was handed down to us. It's like parents hand down behavioral traits and physical traits to their children in the same way. We're children of the living universe, and part of that universe is that all that that 95 unseen portion, and we've inherited the systems that are at work there above, and bells. It's inner visible. Literally, you can see it in a microscope. You just got to connect the dots in the right way. Anyway, so that's and this is one of metabiology's principal tenets is the as above, so below, but taken literally. It's not poesy anymore. It's you can take it. It can be taken really literally, and it's a powerful tool in that way. So that's all I would say to that.
Well, thank you. All right, so shall I move on to the next slide, and we'll go deeper into all of this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we already touched on this earlier when we were talking about the human divinity template, or the anthropos, from a Gnostic perspective. We were talking about the creation of man, the first man, and the imposition, I don't know if to call it the imposition, or the, how would you describe it, Jeffrey? That the Archons are actually part of the makeup of man. And so we have, and that's what this slide is actually about.
Yeah, it's all self-contained, capital S. We're talking about absolute principles and the absolute condition of being. Everything exists within it. You can't separate something out and say this isn't divine. It is, and it has its purpose and part and function in life. In that duality that you're talking about. And part of that duality is the dynamo that drives evolution, but it's all self-contained, capital S. So there's it's the same thing when we take it down to the cell and viruses, or a predator and prey relationship in an ecosystem. There's a dynamo being driven, between the person that's being infected or chased, and the prey or whatever, and that what's prey to one thing preys on another thing, whether it be vegetation or another type of insect or animal life or anything. This is all part of a larger organization of being. When you look at the different organisms in a forest, there's this competition for resources and survival mechanisms at work. but you look at the forest as a larger whole, it's one giant superorganism. In the same way, if you consider two hemoglobin molecules, or red blood cells or whatever in the lung, if we were to just imagine that there was a tiny scientist living on a cell that he thought was his planet in your human body, and he lived near an alveoli. I think that's how you say it. But look, some of these words, alveoli, I think that's how you say it. Mm-hmm. One of the air sacs in the lungs, and he's examining it as a scientist or someone interested in nature would be examining two different animals in the forest competing for resources. And maybe that little scientist on the cell says, look at these two organisms, these two hemoglobin fighting over this oxygen molecule. But what he doesn't realize is that look at how narrow his perspective is, look at the person that the larger being of which he's a part has one identity as one cooperating organism. So it really doesn't matter which hemoglobin molecule gets that oxygen. It's all going to sustain the same life, the same one life. That's that organism. In the same way, we can zoom out and consider us as part of a larger organism, which is cellular Earth, and that there's a larger consciousness. A term from I think that term was originally coined in Ghost in the Machine, but that's not important. And it's the same thing with viruses. You can't separate them out ultimately from life and say that they're something separate, that they're an aberration, or that it was an accident. In the Bhagavad Gita, they say that the Lord is everywhere and always perfect, and that creation is perfect. But a lot of times people tend to separate themselves out of that perfection and say, well, if the Lord is everywhere and always perfect and the world is perfect, then, what do we have to do? What work is there to do? There's wars and famine and things wrong with the planet, and we perceive evil in the world, but it's perfect, right? The Lord has everything, taken care of everything. But you've separated yourself apart from that perfection and that absolute reality. And what's integral to that is our role as co-creators, because we're part of that perfection, and we do have the power of free choice. We just have to take the reins, and realize our capability to be co-creators. So there's a choice in the type of destiny that we forge for ourselves, and the type of future that we will find ourselves in the type of circumstances that we're in now. It's yes, it's perfect as it is now, but it can change, and we can influence it and make it what we want. But we have to understand our role in the larger being. Moving in a sense, that, acting in the world as if we are part of a larger whole. That we're part of one life. Anyway, I was kind of getting off on a tangent there, but speaking specifically to your question about the Archons being part of that larger Anthropos, yes.
In a certain way, because there is what I talked about John Lash earlier about when the Ion goddess Sophia brought herself into the earth plane. There was a discharge that possibly by accident, we could say, created these Archons. Also, even in this text, this is a translation from Gnostic perspective, it is said that Yahweh, I can't pronounce that name either, breathed his own spirit into Adam. He and his Archons tried to retrieve it. So it was almost like an accident happened. And yet here we have the human being, the first Adam, and the first man, and the perfect man created in this image. And then I'm just looking at the picture, and I want to bring a little more, just my part of sort of the poetic nature of looking at the earth as our divine mother, the embodied divine mother. And this is the place where we have our residency, and that we are intimately connected to her. And that is part of the whole creation aspect of the God also. And you could say that is a duality, when from the one Godhead, which we can't call a male or female, we're talking about something androgynous at that point, and it separates out. But just how intimately connected we are. And what you said, Jeffrey, always strikes such a chord in me and my own evolution or my own consciousness is when we really start to grasp the grandeur of the reality in which we are having this experience. When we get out of our own very limited perspective, which could be, again, going back to what we brought in here, where we have this very contrived matrix that's very false that keeps us into all sorts of problematic situations, from, schooling to cars to, credit cards and all of that, how that's really kept us or brought us into a very narrow space where we're not looking up anymore. We're not looking up and in. And that would just be what I would add to it, because it's part of as metabiology, but it's also part of the mystical side of metabiology. So I know I'm ready to move, but Alfred, or wanted to?
Yeah, here was one point I'd just like to mention. In fact, it was also part of the last slide. The whole question of the hologram. Here in our particular sector of the universe hologram, we're in a time-space hologram, and one of the holographic principles, as we all know, is that the whole is contained in each part of the whole. Now, this might be conflating holographic principles with metabiological principles.
That's important.
Yeah, and so I just like to begin to look more at the holographic aspects combined with the metabiological aspects, and that is, if we have the pathogenic artificial intelligence in our time-space hologram, that implies that some aspects of it appear in every part of the larger hologram. Yes. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Now
go ahead.
Yeah, and so in continuation with the discussion we were having earlier, and this is in the area of hypothesis and kind of brainstorming, but it seems to me that that's important, A, in mapping this pathogenic artificial intelligence, and B, in beginning to strategize around it, because we're dealing with holographic principles. So we have to think in terms of the hologram. It's said that our souls are a holographic fragment of source, which means that if the holographic principles stand true, then source is in each of us, and not metaphorically, actually. And so in that way, each one of our souls is now inserting itself, actualizing itself inside the hologram. And so soul power becomes, what's the function of the soul inside the hologram? It's a little bit different from the metabiology, but it's inside the holographic principles. And I just wanted to bring up that point of view, because I think it's very important, because the artificial intelligence understands it, so we should understand it as well.
Yeah. Well, what you say is important, and it actually fleshes very well with metabiology, and we can simplify it, because there's a lot of stuff about the holographic principle that's rooted in quantum physics, and it gets sticky and very technical and very abstract, and there's a problem in physics with that, because with physics we tend to break things down to their constituent parts, and you kind of and then examine them out of context, and try to make sense of things in that way, which isn't. It's like, you separated something, you've taken it out of context, and then you're examining it on its own, and trying to build back up something from scratch when you already have a model for how things relate to each other based on the body. And the biology goes to these higher systems and higher orders of being, and also penetrates into the atom and into particles. And there's a metabiological model for that as well. But specifically speaking to what you're saying about the holographic principle and making it simple and rooting it into biology is that the entire body, if you think of the body as the whole hologram, the entire body is contained in each and every cell in the nucleus, in the DNA. So the proteins that make the body tick, that shape the body, that build the cell and the cell systems, all the entire proteome, which is all the expressed proteins of an organism, is encoded in the DNA. So there you have the whole of the body encoded in each part of the body, in each cell. Okay, so now what we've been talking about on a larger scale, when we're talking about the larger body, everything we've been talking about with AI and with the astral planes and with this kind of stuff, even though the astral planes are, there's an internal reality to it, but it's still part of the external whole. So there's a way in which we, as parts of the external whole, relate to that whole, to that body. But there's also an inner reality in which at our innermost core, just like in the core of every cell, the entire whole is contained. So we are whole and complete in that sense because we're self-contained wholes. So the idea is that each of us in this inner dimension have a nucleus of self, and our individual identities, our soul personalities, are just splinters of that nucleus of self, in the same way that a protein is just one splinter of or spark from the fire that's in the nucleus. That's the genetic material. So there's many different proteins encoded by genes in the nucleus, and each protein that's expressed you could think of it as a little fragment from the source of the nucleus. But its identity ultimately rests in the DNA. It's like the gene in the DNA is the causal body of the protein. If we're thinking about it, we can linearize it like this, just based in 3 dimensions, because it's laid out in the cell. So you can think of the causal body of the protein as the gene, and the subtle body or as the protein transcript or the mRNA, and then the protein as the actual physical manifestation. If we take this linear model in 3 dimensions and apply it to us in a multi-dimensional aspect, we can think of that we have a causal body that's in a causal core, central core, a nucleus of self of sorts, and that it doesn't have as much form as we do now, because the genes don't really have that much form in the DNA. They're part of a larger continuum. They're part of a larger string, part of a larger whole. And the DNA itself as a whole is, again, it's got the whole body inside of it, just in a potential state as genes. It's like the body in a causal state, the physical body in a causal state of that. It's kind of helpful too. So that's how the holographic principle, that's metabiology's kind of twist on it. And you can see it doesn't take the physics aspect of it, but it's more of how genes, that the DNA is a self-contained whole. That the body, the entire manifest universe of the body, is encoded in the center of every cell, of every part. So. Mm-hmm.